weren't able to be here with us tonight. We're hoping that this will be a really nice resource, especially the Q&A for folks for tonight. So just a couple of things as we're in the space. Video and audio are your choice, video in particular. We love to see faces. We know that's not always possible. We're not always sort of welcome if for privacy concerns. Either way is just fine. Virtual or natural backgrounds is great. Audio, we ask folks to stay muted in the main space and then unmuted in the small groups if possible. The chat is there to check in, ask questions, ask for help. And then just like as we were in March, so we'll have folks with the county staff and elected officials use kind of a parentheses C to identify themselves. And that's just to kind of help you know who's in the room. And then we invite media who are here with us tonight to use an M. Both folks will be full participants tonight, and the county folks will just be engaged in the space and answering questions, and same with media. So this is where I started, so I won't do it again, but really, I will do a very brief presentation. I know some folks are looking to hear the share back on what the report that we did on the listening session was like, and I'll just kind of give some high level feedback on that. And then when I finish, I'll also put the link in the chat for folks to look at. And then we'll jump right into the facilitated Q&A with county officials. And then from there, either continue that in the space and then move to small groups. So just to start with a couple intentions, last time we gathered, our intention was just to have the space open for listening. And this time as a couple is kind of the opportunity for the county to respond to a lot of those good questions that were specifically asked by folks in the community who wanted to hear some answers to. And so that's what the focus will be tonight. And then, as I said, sort of moving toward collaborative action together. This is a big issue. It's complex. There's a lot of moving parts, but at least from my perspective, I'm hopeful that there are pieces that feel meaningful and achievable. There are pieces that feel like the community and the county can really work on together. We're hoping to start moving toward that. So just a bit about the listening session report and responses. And I'm going to try and be very brief because I know we're here for the Q&A, but I just wanted to give folks a few of the highlights. This was the report we produced based on the listening session we had in March 24th, and then the survey that went out too, that was out for a couple of weeks. Those intentions were just to hear kind of some high level themes around justice programs, especially around youth, focus on programs and services. There wasn't a direct focus on facilities, but we did get some good input on facilities and shared that. So, and if folks could, I don't have easy access to mute, so if you could kind of check and see if you're all muted, I'd really appreciate that on my behalf. And then the March 24th listening session and with the survey report, and then those appendix responses. One thing we don't always do is release kind of just the entire set of feedback. We felt that was really important in this case, both as transparency for you to hear and to see what folks had to say. And for us to know that we're just one voice in kind of cultivating and sharing these things back, is that we wanted folks to spend some time reviewing that and seeing what made sense, and maybe even seeing things that they may want to change or add or adapt to. So participants, we had good feedback from folks in the city and folks in the county, about 2/3 from the city, 1/3 from the county. This is the survey. This is primarily the survey. We didn't ask for demographic info for the folks at the listening session. Wide range of ages, kind of like racial and ethnic makeup that roughly kind of tracks with what Winona County's demographics are. A lot of folks who have children at home. And then we had a really high, we were really encouraged that it was anywhere between 35 and 50% of people who responded have direct experience with justice programs or the system. So a lot of folks weighing in with lived experience. And we had, this is something that we'll talk about in this process as we go forward. We did have some youth take the survey responses, and this was noted in the March 24th listening session. We didn't have youth engaged. We heard from folks that there's some barriers to that, and we wanted to flag that particularly as kind of a process piece, that as we go forward, especially if this project stays focused on youth, that there's some really great opportunities, I think, to engage youth and directly engage youth, and making sure that is really flagged as this process goes forward, to make sure that youth are really directly connected and at the table. Just briefly on the justice programs and system, these are sort of those percentages of folks who said they had direct experience with it. Lot of response and knowledge and awareness of treatment court and restorative justice. A lower awareness of a lot of the other programs involved. I know the county is going to be talking, Carney and Karin and some folks are going to be talking a bit more about what some of those justice programs are tonight. And then with the programs and services, and these will be in the questions too, because we had some really good questions around this. We heard from the listening session of the survey, a ton of support for restorative justice, a lot of really good comments on how that has really served folks and supported folks. Same goes with treatment court, and some questions around what it might look like for expanding or providing more resources for those programs. There's a huge emphasis across the board in respondents on prevention and how can we work as a community, work with the county, work with our nonprofits, work with community resources, providing really strong support before system involvement, and how can we sort of build these community-based programs and care and wraparound support, and do so in a really imaginative and creative and community-based way. I think that we had tons of comments of folks asking for sort of a process like this, and maybe what might come ahead is that just getting a lot of different folks and ideas in a room and then finding creative ways of meeting these needs. And the county I know county folks will be talking to this tonight, this idea that are there ways of using county resources to support community-based programs? What does that look like now, and what would that look like in the future? So, and then just finally, in March and in that survey, lots of energy and lots of conversation on Future for Youth. I know we have some questions for county folks to respond to talk about juvenile facility tonight, and then a lot of the other questions that came up in the March 24th session, which were looking at facilities like Main House and what that used to be, programs and services and support and prevention and all kinds of wraparound programs that exist outside the system and are delivered by community-based providers, and then a real focus on preventative care. And so we had a large range of opinions and feedback. There was a lot of folks who sort of talked, especially folks with direct lived experience, either themselves or as parents or as caregivers with children, who talked about a lot of the sort of the conflict they feel around this issue, and have seen instances where this has been really supportive to them and having these services, and wanting to see a future in which that feels and looks very different, and what that would look like for our community to work toward that. So it's a really complex and nuanced issue, and this is part of the reason we released that full list of responses. I think one thing we love to see happen in Engage Winona is folks that take that data and that community input and to read through it and to draw conclusions and to tease out themes and to say, hey, these are some really great areas in which we could work together. So just as a final step before we turn it over to the Q&A and start there, that report is available. You can check it out now on it's on our website, engagewinona.org. On the homepage, there's a Justice Programs Engagement icon you can click on. There's a link to view and download the report, and there's also a link for a feedback form, which some dozens of folks have completed, and we really appreciate that. So it's an opportunity to read the report, to talk about what you feel was reflected well, what you feel might be missing or minimized. And that really gives some input on where you could see the county, some opportunities for the county and the community to work together. Those are really kind of the areas that we're hoping to tease out and look at tonight. And then as we continue looking for ways of some collaborative action together going forward. So that is really that's kind of the high level input on the survey, on the report. What I will do is I'm going to come out of my screen share, and it's just so relieving that I can see everybody again. I'm also available. So this Q&A that we'll do for the next 45 minutes or so will be really focused on a lot of the questions that were raised in that March listening session, in the survey. They're arranged in kind of these 4 separate areas, and I'm going to focus in on those kind of in turn. We know we won't be able to get to everything, and so what I'm going to do is I'll ask the questions. We have some county officials and some elected officials we know are looking to respond to them. We're hoping to keep each response at just a couple minutes. The folks responding will see my color-coded backgrounds from green to yellow to red, and that hopefully will just allow us to get to a lot of questions. We'll do what we can to take follow-up questions and other responses. I really invite folks to share that in the chat as we go. Primarily, the intention is to really, we got so many really good core questions in that March listening session. We want to see if we can respond to a lot of those first, but also want to hold some space for others. I'm also, too, I'm happy to respond directly if folks have questions about the listening session or the report or sort of how that came together and what that's used for. So I think, so with that, maybe we can, let me pull up my list here. I think, you know, the only other thing I'll mention is that, just so it's clear for folks here too, I think I could have talked about the priority on questions that we got in March. And that also too, we have a number of elected officials here. We have a number of county staff here. This is, as they respond, this is just sort of them responding as individuals to these questions. I know there are some issues that are still before the county board, some issues that haven't arrived there yet. And just wanted to make sure that it felt really clear that, you know, when individuals are talking, they're speaking up from that space and not sort of on behalf of anyone. So I'm wondering, maybe I can start, you know, that one of the big questions I know that emerged in that March 24th, we'll start with kind of the policy perspective. You know, one of the big questions that emerged was, is the county willing to adopt a zero incarceration policy? I know, Karin, you said you could talk to that a little bit, and then maybe Jeff a bit too.
Sure. Can everybody hear me? Sorry, I've got a new headset on. So great. Thank you for the thumbs up there. This is a real difficult question. I know it came up before. And from a strictly legal standard or legal policy, well, from the statutes, Minnesota law does have a very specific procedure in terms of when and if children, and I think this was pretty much focused on children, but also adults, when people can be brought into custody. I think I'll speak for myself, but probably any prosecutor, that we would like to see nobody in jail. I mean, I would like to not have to prosecute people, but there are situations both in juvenile and adult where there is no option for the safety of the community or the safety of the child or the adult themselves to have to bring them into some custodial situation. And I think some of the concerns that have been raised very legitimately are, you know, we don't want to house our children in jails, and certainly the juvenile justice system was designed in Minnesota at least not to be criminal in nature, although unfortunately I think as I heard, you know, some of the people who've had the lived in experience, they certainly didn't feel it wasn't criminal in nature. So I think ideally, yes, it'd be great to have a zero incarceration policy, but that is really a question that ultimately goes to the legislature that makes the laws. But I think it's also a public safety issue in that you can't have people who need either for their own safety or the safety of others out, and they have to be taken into some kind of custodial situation to protect themselves and others, and also get them into safety if they need mental health treatment. We are trying to work hard on avoiding the use of jail as a mental health facility, and that's what our whole Justice Mental Health Collaboration Program grant work and much of the criminal justice reform is about. So I would ideally like to see a zero incarceration policy, but I think the reality, the facts, you're going to always have to have some facility, and hopefully the best and the most humane facility to house those folks for as minimal amount of time as possible. And I see Brian's yellow is behind him, so I'm going to stop there. So let Jeff add what he'd like. So thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, sounds good, Jeff.
Okay, good. Just in case nobody knows, I'm not sure. My name is Jeff Mueller. I'm the chief deputy with the sheriff's department. The sheriff was unable to attend tonight, so I'm filling in for him and trying to answer the questions that I can. I'm looking forward to actually talking and having a discussion about these different issues. When it goes towards the zero incarceration policy, it's a little bit of the echo of Karn's. I won't drone on about it, but it's certainly a goal to work towards that, at least anyway. The sheriff's department is responsible for housing people who are ordered by the court to be in custody. The factors that often factor into whether somebody's in secure detention or something less than secure detention is based on what the facts that, unfortunately, the circumstances that are happening with that specific situation. They always attempt to go for the lowest level of security for whether it's juveniles or adults to try to minimize some of those effects. In Winona County, my experience has been, at least anyway, that by far and away, non-secure juvenile detention is a priority that often is over secure detention. There's a more of a need for that, I would make the case. I know one of the questions relates to the main house, if anybody was familiar with that and what that was when it was in Winona. That was a big resource that was lost in Winona County when that was available. Our closest non-secure facilities that we take right now are Olmsted County, up to some of their facilities. But in general terms and speaking, once again, depending on what the circumstances are that are happening, police, initial responding police even, will often try and, depending on, once again, the circumstances, try to mitigate the situations. Perhaps if it's such a volatile situation, but maybe doesn't rise to the level of criminal and that sort of thing, we look for alternatives to do with the juveniles, to potentially go with another family member or any other alternatives like that also. I'll just leave it at that for now.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. And maybe I can follow up with that. There's another question that came up. A number of folks asked about because you mentioned it. The question is, what is the difference between a secure and a non-secure facility? And I know you mentioned that. Maybe you can speak to that a bit.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So a secure detention facility, it is essence more like a jail, meaning that you're not free to walk out of the building. There's locked doors and things like that. Non-secure facilities, for instance, like the main house, the doors were not locked. It's more of a, for lack of a better term, a house. It's a house that had bedrooms and looked like a regular old house that people would go to. That's similar to the facility that's in Olmsted County right now. Once again, it's not a locked facility. And so depending on what the circumstances of the youth is dealing with and what either the allegations are that they're in custody for or why they're in those places will dictate as to where they would go for that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Another question in that policy arena was one. We know we heard this a lot in the listening session too, and in the survey is the county willing, and maybe it's a question: is the county willing or able to end youth solitary confinement or disciplinary room time? And Karin, I'm guessing that's something you can speak to, and certainly others too, if that's something that falls under your purview.
Yeah, I think when I saw this question, it kind of raises two issues. Are you talking about the disciplinary rooms like that would be used in a school setting for instance, kids or special education rooms where they can put a child in, which versus solitary confinement for, say, a child who might be at the Red Wing Correctional Facility, and they do have facilities there where at least when I was a public defender, and this was over 10 years ago now, I had clients who were in Red Wing in basically a 23-hour solitary confinement room, and we're only allowed out one hour a day. So, but I guess I want to make it clear that particularly in juveniles, and that's what we're talking about, youth here, looking at this question, the presumption when a child comes before a judge is that they will be released and that they will not be held in custody unless certain factors are met. So, for instance, in Winona County, we have had very few children over the years, and I did provide Brian with a pretty lengthy data on from 2015 to 2020 figures. But in fact, we didn't have any kids in solitary confinement. It's not used I'll say it's used very rarely. And I think there's a stronger movement away from it because it simply is, well, cruel, really. But again, the basis of juvenile, when a child comes before a judge for a juvenile detention hearing, is the presumption is that they would be released unless there's probable cause to support that they've committed a very serious assault-like charge, or all the way up to murder, criminal sexual conduct, things like that. So, but only when absolutely necessary. And I think, again, there's a trend away from that solitary confinement or disciplinary room. I just haven't heard of that being used. And I know Rebecca Church is on this call with us, or on this here. And so I see Brian has cited right what I'm referring to. There's a link for all of that information. So you'll see that in Winona County, we really have had very, very few children that have been even placed in secure detention. So.
Yeah, thanks, Karin. And I will mention, Karin mentioned, so I put in the chat, as we were preparing for tonight's conversation, we were collecting some resources, and those are all linked. So we have a project page on our website that I mentioned earlier. Those are linked there. And so if you near the top of the page where I think it says something like info for April 29th event, there's a document that we'd really encourage folks to check out and, provide your thoughts either in the form or even like sort of in the moment in the chat here. There is some, a lot of folks had questions around details around what do youth numbers look like? What are some of the offenses? What does the process look like? What is some of the racial and ethnic backgrounds for folks? And some of that is in there, and then in other cases, I think that's data that isn't collected and that's made clear there. So I'd really encourage folks to check that out. Kind of the last question on the policy of these four main, policy, programs, facilities, and finances were sort of the four categories these questions fell under. The last question of their policy, and this is which is, how do we get a commitment from our elected officials to work toward funding or more funding for community support programs? And I think if I kind of like translate that into what I was hearing in the listening session, it's really, is there funding and resources coming from governmental sources that the county has access to that can be used for community-based programming? And if so, what does that landscape look like, and how is there an ability and a commitment for the county to look for sources like that? So that's really that's a question I think for anybody to speak to, whether it's county commissioners or county staff.
Brian, this is Chris Meyer. I'm county commissioner, and I'll just at least put out a kind of a initial thoughts. So I'm happy to make a commitment to support community programs to the extent that it is possible. But I want you to keep in mind that as a county commissioner, I do need to follow state statute and state rules. And so in cases like this, where it requires that the county provide a jail, that's something that I'm going to do. But I also want you to know that it is my job to make sure that we get value for the money that we spend our taxes on. And so I want to make sure that the programs that we implement are effective. And I want to make sure that they address the most important issues. So for example, we know that when we spend $1 on our treatment court program, we get $10 to $12 worth of savings in other places. So it isn't just the right thing to do, it's financially the right thing to do as well. And so, my goal is really that we could immediately start working on how to bring crisis mental health and detox beds to Winona, and how can we expand the available mental health services, because that's a thing that's come up a lot in these listening sessions, but that also in our sequential intercept mapping. And I really want to see that same kind of analysis done for youth gaps, so that we can be smart about how we spend money. Now, we administer social services on behalf of the state of Minnesota, and we don't get fully reimbursed. And so the point is that if we try to do, we still spend some tax levy money on it, but if we go above and beyond, it does mean that we have to figure out alternative ways to fund it, either from the levy or through grants or other mechanisms. And those are things that our staff is always looking at to try and assist us. Thanks.
Brian, this is Marie Cavesi. I'm also a county commissioner. I agree with the options that Commissioner Meyer has put out there. I can also commit to funding and supporting the continuum of care, the full continuum of care in our community, with emphasis on diversion and protection. If you look at our budget priorities, some of the things we have to keep in mind as we go through the options that we're presented with. I've promoted and used the state has a system called Results First in Minnesota. And it's a separate arm. It's not a program arm of the state administration. It's the administrative arm, and they review programs that are being used from a cost analysis benefit. So so they give out information basically that we can use, the people who are actually doing the choosing of which programs we're going to fund and how we're going to fund them. We can use data from this organization to show the cost analysis and the benefits, and they review programs. They might consider a program theory-based, or another program might be considered an effective program, and they do that by researching. So some of the things they've looked at adult criminal justice options, they've looked at substance abuse options, they've looked at youth options, and some of the things that come out as highly effective are things like cognitive behavioral therapy and some of the things that we know, so that when we as commissioners are looking at the options we have, we can use all of this data to help make decisions. Some of the other data that I use are my own experiences as a teacher for blind and visually impaired children. I often worked with families and with young people one-to-one, and so that gives me at least some comparison of the youth brain development other than my own two children. And I can tell you that even between the two children in our family, the youth brain development span or whatever was extremely wide and different between the two children, which is quite amazing and sometimes amusing. But also the volunteering that people have done in the community. We use all of these experiences and all of these discussions to help focus as we come to a decision about programs to fund. And one thing I did today, I looked up in our board meetings since just January of this year, we approved 13 different contracts which had to do with mental health or substance abuse or different issues in the with public programs. And so we approved 13 different programs with 7 different agencies in the community. So that's just one picture of how wide we go into the community and how we're always looking for options to use to assist with the decisions that we make.
Yeah, thanks, Marie. And Karen Sanis, I know you're with us, and maybe this is something to speak to too. I did want to kind of add a follow-up, because I know this is part of the primary questions folks were hoping to have answered, and something I think I'm hearing in some of these responses. So I'm curious, as you're looking at these range of programs, what are the key sources to bring in funding for community-based programs? I mean, I heard grants, I heard kind of new programs. And are there ways, I know that we had some specific questions from community members who said, are there ways that I can help get involved? I mean, is there funding we can help pursue? Are there things that you need commitments from nonprofits or community groups? I mean, are there ways that the community can kind of take steps to help support that?
Right. Yeah. So with the Children's Services, we receive federal, state, and county funds that go towards the programs within our community. Some instances are like our CAC, CADI, and TBI and disability services waivers. Those are federal dollars to provide services like legacies, home and community options, things like that. And then, our state funding, we receive funding through, we also receive funding through targeted case management, things like that. Those are federal funds also. One thing I did want to bring up is that there's been a large review of our Minnesota system over the past several years, and Minnesota is really lagging. They are at the bottom of the amount of money spent on children's services in the entire nation. And so we're trying to fix that. There has been some money allocated through the next biennium that is currently going through the legislature to kind of perk up those services for prevention. They have not passed legislature at this point, but then also our local area, our county boards through contracts and things like that, we do allocate funds through that and through my budget. One of the other areas is grants. Grants are tricky because grants typically have an ending point, and then how do we fund it from there? Is the sustainability behind those grants? So we've run up against this in many situations where we have to come back to the county board. Treatment court, I believe, was one of them. Karen, is that correct? Where we ended up having to go to the county board and ask for levy dollars to be able to sustain that program. Our jail intake worker was another one through our initial rep. So we're currently in our 4th year of a Systems of Care grant that is for high fidelity wraparound services that is administered through Hiawatha Valley Mental Health Center. And then we're looking at sustainability of that grant program. We're hoping not to have to come to the county board for additional funding for that. But then also we have what's called Families First Prevention and Services Act that is coming. It's federal legislation that was brought forward in February of 2018. We're currently writing our state plan and are hoping to have that plan submitted to the federal government by July of this year. And some of that act will begin October 1st of this year, and then hopefully implementing prevention services in January of 2022. So there's a lot of things coming at this point, but nothing that it would be really premature for me to start talking about how it's funded, because I don't even think, working with DHS at this point, I don't think that they know for sure. So you just turned red, Brian, so I will be quiet.
Yeah, and I appreciate folks sort of abiding by that. I think that's the way of us trying to really respond to a broad range of questions. I know I also know too that there are nuances and technicalities and complexities to all of these. I mean, the intention, I think, for this process, I mean, is to explore some of these pieces at a high level with the intention of finding what is it that the county and the community can work on, especially in the realm of sort of community-based programs, community-based support, expanding and supporting existing resources, seeking to kind of sort of collaboratively create something that may not be there. So seeing all of this as really, hopefully for folks participating, helpful background to help make sort of empowered decisions about where are some of those intersections.
Karen also just pointed out a really important source of information that that I use as a county commissioner when we're in the budget discussions, and that's our own staff. Staff make presentations, they get us involved in things in different boards and committees. There's all kinds of information. Our staff is a huge resource, and I would be remiss if I left them out of the picture.
Thanks, Marie. And Karen, go ahead.
Thanks. I'm still trying to figure out how to use these reactions, right? I wanted to just kind of follow up on what Karen Stanis said. I mean, she's right about the fact that we have these grants that fund essentially community support programs, and treatment court is an example of one of them that's in the, it's not what I think some of the communities looking for, which is that early intervention prevention, but it is an example, and it is one that we had to then really work hard to get sustained by collaborating not only with the county funding it, but also the state of Minnesota through the judicial system. So it's a good example of a combination, but it's also a good example of, because we then also started what's called Friends of Treatment Court, which is a community-based foundation that also then supports treatment court. And another example that I think is a great example of community partnership with the county is our Justice Mental Health Collaboration Program grant number 2, in which we partner with Hiawatha Valley Mental Health Center. And I see Eric Sievers, the director, is also on this session. And it's partnering with a community partner. And the county actually partners a lot with Hiawatha Valley Mental Health Center on other things, but it's our first foray, I think, into the justice part. But that also is a program that we will have to be looking to sustain and need community support to do that after our grant funds run out in 3 years. So.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Karen. And I think signposting some of those pieces, I think as we move into kind of some kind of more focused discussions around some of these specific projects or issues, I mean, I think, I know at least I will look forward to having, to talking very concretely about what some of that support, how do we define community support and what would make that sustainable? I do want to move into, there's a lot of questions we had come up during the March listening session and in the survey around programs. I want to highlight a couple of them. I know Katie with Restorative Justice is with us tonight. And Katie, I'm wondering if you can, we had a lot of questions to hear from somebody on the ground with Restorative Justice, just what that program looks like today, just briefly in a couple minutes. And then maybe this is a question for you or for county staff. And because the other question was, are there opportunities to expand something like restorative justice to youth to adults in a community-based way?
Yeah, so right now, restorative justice, we're running a couple different programs with COVID. We have a couple that are kind of on pause for right now. But our main focus right now is early intervention truancies and diversion truancies. That's keeping us very busy for the school year. Just checking up on kids, doing whatever we can to help them maintain going to school online, either in person or distance learning. We are doing our mentoring program, so just checking up on those kids. Again, that's kind of on hold for right now, but once we can get back in the building and safely do it, we will get that back up and running. We do a life skills course, and that is for high school students who are credit deficient. We run about a 13-week course for them to receive credit towards graduation. We also do diversions for youth, so first-time offenders. We hold a listening circle with the victims, offenders, and try to come up with a contract for the victim, or excuse me, for the offenders to complete, and kind of restore and repair the harm that they have caused to the offender, kind of rebuilding the trust in the community for them as well. And as for moving into working with adults, me and my coworker Megan have recently started looking into this. So it's very in the beginning stages for us. Just looking at different programs that we could be involved in. We're working towards looking at different trainings we could be a part of to kind of get this up and running. Working with the Advocacy Center of Winona, working with them, kind of just getting ideas thrown out there so we can bring them back to our supervisor to kind of create an idea of expanding this to adults as well. So that's just kind of in the works, but again, very beginning stages for us. So something to look forward to, but definitely a work in progress.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. And I know we had a lot of questions around restorative justice and kind of those desires to expand it. So if there are folks here tonight who had some of those questions, and if you're looking for other answers or things, please do put those in the chat and we'll stay with it. I mean, I'm curious from a policy or program perspective from county staff, county elected officials. I mean, there was kind of this call in some of our questions around, is this something that could be financially supported? Is it something that could be expanded? I mean, and sort of what might that require on like an administrative or a funding level to create a larger program?
Brian, thank you, Katie. I wanted to thank you for attending tonight and making your comments. The Juvenile Justice Work Group for the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council just held a meeting recently, and we've just started into the SIMS process for juvenile services. And we started with the truancy program because it is distinct from any of the other juvenile programs. And we had school district officials there. We had our restorative justice people. We had the juvenile justice county staff, and then anyone else on the juvenile justice work group, which I happen to be on. So when we were discussing restorative justice and the effect on truancy programs, the school people mentioned that half of the truancy referrals actually qualify for restorative justice. So some of them don't need restorative justice and they would not qualify. So, but half of them do qualify for restorative justice. And according to the school district officials, they said 75 to 80% of the juveniles that go through the restorative justice program for truancy are actually successful. So we stopped our meeting right there. We thought that sounded really good. We're actually going to continue discussing the other options, but for restorative justice to have such a high rate of success where children are starting to attend school, they're not late, they're fulfilling their responsibilities as a student in school. So we think that's a pretty good option right there.
Yeah, thanks, Marie. And Karen, I see your hand up. And you please do go ahead and respond. I want to know, I mean, there's a couple of good questions in the chat. And Karen, maybe you can see those too. You know, why is restorative justice being used for truancy? We'll take this one for, I mean, why is it being used for truancy, and how many WAP students have been referred to the county for truancy? That may be a public schools question we may not be able to answer. So Karen, maybe if you can speak to some of those.
Yeah, I see those in the chat, and I kind of wanted to, I mean, that kind of goes along with what I wanted to address, which is that restorative justice is a partnership between my office, the county attorney's office, and the Department of Corrections to really strengthen our juvenile diversion program. By law, every county attorney's office is supposed to have a juvenile diversion program. And and it's something that I would do even if it wasn't in the law. So, but we have partnered with DOC for many years, and I mean, it's a good question I see from Mary Jo Klinkner about why Why is it in the Department of Corrections? Well, part of the reason is that the county attorney's office handles all the juvenile delinquencies and the juvenile truancies. And our truancy diversion program is something that helps kids avoid coming to court in the first place. It starts early before we even get a truancy. I mean, in order to be actually a truant in court, you have to have 7 or more truancies. So even before that, we get involved. And when I say we, it's as Katie and her colleagues, and then my assistant county attorney, Rebecca Church, coordinates that, as well as the juvenile diversion program. And so it comes out of, yes, a criminal, well, I should say actually juvenile law, if you look at it defined in the law, is not a criminal area of the law. It's a civil area. So it's really not, if you want to be, literally to the word of the definition, it's not a corrective, but it's the Department of Corrections is running it because it's a program that helps kids, like I said, avoid a criminal or a juvenile delinquency or a truancy. So I think we'd certainly love to have more community support for those programs, because we have fought to continue to fund those programs. And unfortunately, right now, they have to be funded through the property levy. And I think the Department of Corrections also helps fund some of the positions within the restorative justice program. But it's something that we tried to expand to adults about 8 years ago and didn't get a lot of community support. So again, we're very open to having more community involvement to help sustain those programs and create some programs that would also help adults get into restorative justice. So thanks.
Yeah,
Brian?
thanks, Car. Yeah,
This is Chris, and I just
hi,
want to
Chris.
make
Great.
one
I couldn't find you on my screen. I'm glad you identified yourself.
I
Thank
just
you.
want to make one quick comment going back to your original question, and that is that I would love to see the continuation of that process to figure out what the gaps are. That is really what it would take for me to understand what it is that we need and how we can be effective and target. And then I would love to have community support to work for the programs that would potentially fill the gaps.
Great. Thanks,
Brian?
Chris. And yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Brian, this is Miss Church. I just wanted to correct something that's in the chat if I could. This was discussed at the last CJCC juvenile justice meeting. That's been talked about, how we talked about the truancy mapping. And it said WAPS considers one misguided study learning to be 5 absences. Judge Lee, the courts and myself and the schools have worked together. We're in Winona County. We do not look at accepting non-excused absences for when the law says one missed period in high school is considered, you count that 7 times. However, it's been decided in Winona County that we go a half a day, because what we didn't want is people who are wandering the halls, because the courts feel like that is something that the school should be handling and not the court should be handling. So we do handle truancies a little differently, a little more, I guess, broader, that we look at. They have to have a half day in order for us to count that as one unexcused absence. So they can't just miss a guided study hall. So I just wanted to correct that information. And like I said, that is in the notes from our juvenile justice system, because that was talked about at length as well.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca, and thanks for those responses. I mean, I want to flag a couple of things. I mean, I think there was a clear request made that there would be a desire to talk more about community support, and I think there's conversation too around where sort of the roots of restorative justice and Angela's comment in the chat, and how it's moved, and at least what I'm feeling in there. And so one thing we're trying to find to kind of feel through from Engage Winona's world in this conversation is, where are there places for us to put together a small group and go deeper? And I'm seeing that there's some good energy around restorative justice, and I think that's something we'd be happy to flag and pull together a group to have a larger conversation on that. So I wanted to, I'll pause the restorative justice conversation piece for now with hopes that sort of satisfies some of those questions, knowing that there'll be an opportunity to continue that conversation. I did want to jump into maybe another question or two on the program element, and then just kind of present the group with a choice of whether we want to continue with the Q&A or kind of move into some smaller group conversations. A question that came up, quite a bit, I think this also sort of tracks with this idea of what could be sort of in a community-based space, was a question around, could youth groups or homes or programs be managed by a community or nonprofit? And I admit to not understanding a lot of the background on Main Street, and I know there was a lot of the Main Street home or whatever that, and I know there's questions around that too, and I don't know if that connects, but maybe somebody could speak a bit to that. I think this goes back to a lot of the energy and the community participation around where are there ways that there could be community-based programming, support, and care provided. So I'm not sure who the best one is to kind of respond to that, but
I can respond to that, Brian.
Thanks, Karen.
Yes, so what we would prefer is for a private nonprofit to come in to manage a group home that has the background with licensing, that knows the regulations. Just because coming in to try and just have a community-based organization come together to try and put something in place is going to be difficult. It's going to be very, very difficult. Because the licensing regulations for a facility that provides services to children are vast and wide and very complex. So, I know we are using the Southeast Crisis Center hired Nexus to come in and provide that. Nexus also is part of Girard Academy over in Albert Lee, and then also over Von Wald, which is our shelter care. So there's a pretty significant presence here in southeastern Minnesota. So I'm not saying that they would have to, but I think Main Street House, wasn't that a family and children's center program at one point, I believe? And they had managed that at some point. One of the issues I think that some of these facilities are having are staffing, trying to staff these facilities for appropriately because our legacies, our home and community options are struggling just because we're in an employee or staffing shortage just across the boards and through the nation, and it's going to continue to get worse while our baby boomers continue to retire, and that there's less people coming into the workforce to be able to take over those jobs. So we would need to be creative in how we do that. Yes, you're right. It is, Girard is in Austin and not Albert Lee. I apologize. So we just need to continue to look at, different ways and be creative with staffing and how that can look. And then also within those licensing regulations, there is staffing, requirements. So you just can't have one staff for 12 children. I mean, I think it's a 1 to 6 or a 1 to 4 in some cases, depending on the licensing. So it is something that we could begin talking about. It would be nice to have here in our area. What our federal government is looking for is something, what is called a QRTP, which is a Qualified Residential Treatment Program, which is a very smaller, most family-like situation for children to be able to go into treatment. They want these facilities to be less than 6 children in a home. So it's something that we could begin talking about, and there is going to be funding coming available to become a QRTP, which is a certification and licensing standard. So it's coming down the road, it's coming down the pike, but I don't know if there is any other funding that is going to be available for us to be able to pull down. And we are meeting with our CREST director I believe next week, to be able to start talking about that. CREST is adult and children mental health. Well, it's adult funds, but they're trying to expand those CREST funds to children also, which might be an option for us to be able to help fund something like that. So it is out there, but we need to get creative.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Karen. And there's another, so a question, and I see the question in the chat from Scott, and I think I want to signpost that because I want to bring that next. Are there plans to build, create a juvenile detention center? I'll tag to that. And if you're hearing a motorcycle in my background, that's Engage Winona has been facilitating from our home since the start of the pandemic, and it's that season. So I want to ask one question while flagging that for the next one coming, because I want to hear from folks on that. Are there plans to build, create a juvenile detention center? There was a related question around the funding piece and where that funding would be coming from, and could that funding be used for other purposes? And I want to flag that for the conversation too. Before that, there was just one more question on the program side, Karen, that I know a lot of folks were asking in the listening session in the survey. Is how is the county addressing out-of-home placement of children? The specific question was the significant increase, and I don't want to make that assumption, but maybe you can speak to whether there is an increase. And so, what programs exist that can sort of prevent out-of-home placements?
Well, many years ago, there was what was called the Governor's Task Force on Child Protection, and they completely revamped our what we call our child protection screening guidelines. Screening guidelines are what bring our children into our system, and what that did, it broadened the ability to bring more children into our system. And when we bring more children into our system, it results in more out-of-home placements. And that has been across the state of Minnesota. We have seen a huge spike in out-of-home placements. With that, there was very few prevention services that were brought on board at that time. And so it really caused the perfect storm. And also, like I said, I'm getting someone's feedback there. Sorry.
Yeah, 1 second. I'm trying to find Meg here. Here we go.
Okay. And then, like I stated, that the state of Minnesota is one of the states at the bottom of the list for funding child welfare programs. So I talk about that continuum of care and that prevention model, where prevention should be the biggest. State of Minnesota has invested so much money in the out-of-home placement and little in primary and secondary prevention that we're trying to flip that now and really working on it. And people have to understand that trying to flip a system from that is so tertiary or reactionary to a more prevention and early intervention takes time through government agencies. That everything we do is through the legislature, and we have a legislative session, once a year. We're in one right now, and there are tons of bills that are trying to get passed. And so everything that we do is through statute, and then implementing and defining that statute, and then operationalizing it. So it is difficult sometimes to be able to do some of that. One of the areas that we have more flexibility at the local level is through our child welfare services. We can kind of tailor those to be able to work a little more closely on the prevention end or early intervention end. That's not so structured with statute, and we kind of have a little more wiggle room with how we can design that. We have some child welfare services within Winona County, but I think that would be an area we could look at expanding at some point. Did I answer your question?
Great. Go ahead, Rebecca.
And I just because I feel like we're in an audience that doesn't necessarily always speak the language that we speak every day. So what Karen Tanis was talking about was more of a child protection involvement, and those are involvements because they're concerned about the parents' inability or ability to care for the children or keep the child unsafe, versus what I hear a lot of also conversation about is juvenile delinquencies or juveniles committing crimes and is that placement number going up? So just when we're speaking, Karen Sanis deals with all of that. And so I just want to make it clear everything that she was just talking about right now is involving child protection cases and not juvenile delinquency or petty offense cases.
Well, in essence, we do deal with juvenile delinquencies through child welfare with one of our workers in my office that works through child welfare to try and work with pretrial kids. That is a child welfare response through my office.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Rebecca, and thanks, Karen. And I appreciate that too. I know that there's a. You're right. It's an entirely different language, and I think the efforts folks are making to make that clear and accessible and understandable is really helpful. I want to do two things. So there's that question I'm really looking forward to hearing some responses on. Is there intention at the county to build a juvenile detention facility? I would, in that comment in the chat, there was a question around the intention of this forum itself. And so this process is Engage Winona's work. We're a contract partner with the county in this circumstance, really to look at programs and services and ways that we can better connect community resources and community support and even community-based programming to this ecosystem, what the county provides. That's really the intention of this process. But that said, we know there's a lot of energy and conversation around facilities. And so we've really welcomed that into this space. And so the intention here, at least from Engage Winona's perspective, is just this agenda-free facilitation to start looking for collaborative action that the county and community can work on together. And at the same time, knowing that we're providing a really great space for folks to speak to that question. So while folks are responding to that question, I'm going to launch a really quick poll. We're just after 7. And as a group, we really have a kind of a quick decision. We can stay in this space and continue doing some Q&As to about maybe 7:30 or a little bit after and kind of wrap for the night and then plan some of these in-depth conversations. We can also respond to this question and then spend a little bit of time in breakout rooms focused more specifically on youth programs, adult programs, and then a more specific focus on crisis and intervention care. And so those would be about a half hour in these smaller conversation rooms, talking through ways in which the county and the community can come together. So I would just really want to hear from the intention of the folks in this space tonight. Are you more interested in just kind of engaging in the Q&A for a while here and then closing, or are you more interested in those small group conversations? So I'll launch a poll, but as that's there, I just want to bring that question to the space for county elected officials to respond to, again, noting that officials here are just sort of responding to their own opinion, their own perspectives, and for county staff to speak to. I mean, is there an intention to pursue building a juvenile detention facility? And then if you could speak to a bit about that funding question too.
I can start, Brian. This is Chris Meyer. So as to the funding question, I guess the question was something like, if we have millions of dollars for a juvenile detention facility, then couldn't we use that for the various community supports? And my response is, well, I don't think there are millions of dollars. And that was not a decision that the board ever approved. If we did want to build some kind of a facility, ultimately it comes out of the levy. As far as the question, I don't even quite know what is meant by a juvenile detention facility. A lot of times folks have referred to a particular statement that was in the report that came out about the jail needs assessment. But that was certainly a question that I wouldn't have approved without further understanding of what the request was. And that is for me the point of why I asked at the board level to have the listening sessions, was so that I could hear exactly the kind of input that I'm hearing. And so the answer is no. I would certainly, I don't have a plan. And in terms of, I think sometimes what I've heard described in the media is something that's like a jail with locked cells and bars. And no, of course I wouldn't support that. What is the need? And that's really what I want to hear. And I would certainly want a ton more information about that before I would be willing to make any kind of a financial commitment towards brick and mortar from the county perspective. So that I'm 1 out of 5, just 1 vote, but that's my answer.
Yeah, Brian, this is Marie Kavesi. This question keeps coming up and we keep answering it, and I just keep being surprised that it keeps coming back up. At one of the recent board meetings regarding the jail, when we reached a decision point of kind of how much to spend and how much to buy, I believe this was in January of this year, the board accepted an option from the design and construction committee to proceed with an 80-bed jail option with no plans for juvenile resources and no plans for revamping the old jail. So we did make that decision. So there are no plans. When it was being discussed, and probably one of the reasons why we discarded the option of a juvenile center of some kind, there was a price tag put on it of 25 million. So somehow in the public mind, there was an idea that there's 25 million that the county is spending on juveniles. Why can't we take that and spend it on other community options? So first of all, there is not 25 million. It would have to be levied. We can't use state money for something like that. And that was part of the decision in January when we accepted the option to go with an 80-bed jail with no juvenile and no revamping of the old law enforcement center. Part of that was financial. 25 million seemed like a lot of money to some people. So we discarded the option of even discussing a juvenile center of any kind. What is going on in the juvenile justice work group for CJCC is kind of parallel to the Sims workshop that we just had for criminal justice in the community. And that is a sequential intercept model. We're mapping out where are the points where we have programs, where are there gaps, what do we, sort of designing or coming up with, hopefully, what is missing in our juvenile justice services, and where can we go to fill in those gaps. So that is going on, but that means no decisions about anything firm. We're still in the stage of organizing what we have, what we need, looking at what works the best, what we can use in our community, what resources we already have. All of those kinds of discussions is what we're going with right now. And that should, just as the Sims process is focusing us on certain gaps in the system, the juvenile Sims process should focus our attention onto where the gaps are, and then we can organize how to work with those gaps and fill them in. So I hope that makes sense. Happy to answer that question anytime. Although I am surprised that it keeps coming up. There are no plans with the county board to have a juvenile justice center. So there's no, yes, we could, there's a question in the chat. Could we still levy that money for social justice? Every year when we do the budget, we levy money for social justice and mental health services. So that's always in the picture, depending on what the will of the board is to increase the levy for the community.
Thanks, Marie. And Commissioner Marsha Ward, I saw you had unmuted too, and I think I accidentally muted you, so I didn't mean to do that. I was wondering if that was something you wanted to speak to. And I hope I didn't.
Can you hear me?
Great, I can,
Okay.
yes.
I think some of the question of a juvenile detention center comes from when we went to the legislature almost 2 years ago looking for maybe some financial resources. And we did entertain the idea of something regional for a juvenile detention facility without any research or any fact finding or anything. It was just a concept that was thrown out to trying to get some money out of the general legislature. Now, since then, the board has taken no action, but some staff have had, in particular, I think Steve Buswell had some conversations with some of the Department of Corrections people as to what would this possibly look like? What kind of staffing would be required? And some of that, but that none of that has been shared with the board at this time. But I think some staff, even including, I think Karen Sonneman may have been looking into some things through the CJCC. So it is an issue that's still kind of lingering out. In my opinion, it's still kind of lingering out there. The board has not had any discussion, has not been presented any facts, findings, staffing reports, or anything related to that at this point in time. Thank you.
Thanks, Marcia. And I also see, so Justin Green, I see you have your hand up, and Justin is the chair of the jail committee a few years ago, and I'm wondering if that's something you want to speak to, Justin, too. And I also, because there's also in the chat that kind of quote from that 2019 report that talks about the facility to house juveniles is badly needed in Southeast Minnesota, and beds can be made available to other counties when not in use by Winona County, creating a potential revenue stream. So Justin, I'm not sure if that's kind of in the wheelhouse of what you were looking to comment on, but I did want to give you some space here.
Thank you. I did chair the Jail Advisory Committee. The committee, when it was formed by the county board, was given the instruction to research the whole question of a replacement jail, which we did. And the report, which runs a couple of hundred pages, is on the website. It's on the county website, I know. But towards the end of the conversation, the committee considered two questions that the board had not specifically asked us to address, but which we thought were important as part of the planning of the replacement jail. One was mental health in the jail, and the other was a juvenile facility. We knew, of course, all the things that you've read about in various places about the way in which we handle juveniles now, and the fact that if they have to be, I don't know what the right word is, detained someplace, we cannot do it in the jail that we have now. We have to take them to a place approved by the state. Many times it results in a 4 or 5 or even 6 hour travel, and sometimes out of state, in order to find a place to house our juveniles. And then as soon as we get them there, we got to bring them back for first appearance in the court. And every time they need to go to court, we have to send a deputy up to get them and bring them back and then take them back to the facility and so forth. So that's the point that Brian referred to. That's a quotation from the report that the committee filed. We knew all along that the board was not particularly interested or concerned about the question of how to handle juveniles, that they had their hands full with the jail. And everything that the 3 commissioners that we heard from tonight is certainly true. And there is nothing on the board's agenda that says they have done anything about a juvenile facility. On the other hand, I simply point to the paragraph in the final report of the Jail Advisory Committee that says this is a question that we ask the board to take up and for the board to study. Personally, I think it's a little too soon to do that. We're still designing the jail. We have lots of open questions about the structure and so forth of the jail and who's going to be housed in the law enforcement center and other questions. So maybe it comes back again, but the Jail Advisory Committee asked the county to consider it at some point. We didn't put a deadline on it, and we didn't ask them to do it right away. We just said this is a question that is related to the jail, related to the question that you asked us to investigate, and this is what we were asking you to do.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Justin, and for speaking to this space. A couple of things. I mean, just very briefly. So the poll came back about 4-1, and folks want to stay here in the Q&A, and so we're going to choose to do that and go with the majority of the group. We'll plan to be in this space for maybe about 15-20 minutes or so at most, and then close and talk about next steps. For folks who are looking for the breakout rooms, I think one thing I want to signpost is that is starting to feel like that's a really good frame for our next gathering together and sort of doing some of that more immersive work. So I want to make sure that folks who are expecting that know that will still be coming, and appreciate your patience with this. I did want to, there's a couple of comments in the chat. I will read a few of those here in a minute, because I know we have some folks calling in. I do want to speak. There was a comment that says, so this question on juvenile detention facility contradicts the blueprints from the architects that the county board is looking at. I'm speaking from just like a little bit of knowledge here, so I don't want to get anything wrong, but I think the question is that there are some blueprints and some options for the jail design that suggest juvenile space. And I'm wondering if somebody could kind of talk more about that process, or what those are.
Yeah, I think I can do that, Brian. It's Ken Fritz, the county administrator. When we originally talked to Klein McCarthy about the jail space that we have already, the existing jail space, we were looking for adaptive reuses for it. So in that conversation in the committee, we asked Klein McCarthy, well, what can we do? We looked at would there be a space for some kind of juvenile facility, and that's no definition, just we know that there's an issue, as Justin pointed out. We know that there's concerns with sending juveniles out of town. There's a cost to it. There's a social cost to it as well. And so one of the things was, well, is there any chance that we could reuse the existing space for something constructive? That's what the Klein McCarthy was responding to, just as they responded to our request to ask them how we could incorporate more space for the Winona PD department. We also looked at that, and I think in the same plans or similar plans, you'll see options that were explored in those areas. But it never went past that point that we focused on the jail, and those things fell off and kind of got molded into this or feathered into this discussion.
Thanks, Ken. That's helpful. And Jeff, I saw you had unmuted too. I wasn't sure if you wanted to speak to that as well.
I was just going to really echo what Ken had said and explain what he did, other than just make the other comment to let everybody know that there is money being spent on housing juveniles. So whether you're spending money on a new facility or whether you're spending money on housing juveniles outside of the county, like Ken said, there's a cost to doing that, and there's a social cost to doing that too, taking the kids out of the community, away from family, away from resources, away from really the community connection, which is a huge concern, but just dollars and cents also looking at it. Now, I know there's a lot that would say we never want the juveniles to be in the system to start with, and there's something to be said for that. I appreciate that, but when the juveniles do come into the system, based on whatever the circumstances is that they're dealing with, that brought them to that anyway, money is spent to house them. So one of the things that was being looked at was how much money is being spent out of county, and trying to factor in the social cost also to having them not in the community anymore, and seeing how those numbers also looked, if it looked like it made more sense to have something local versus shipping them out. So that's what I was just going to add.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. And I'm wondering could folks maybe speak? I know we had some questions in the March listening session. And I know, I see some folks at the Human Rights Commission here, and I know there's a resolution coming to the City Council around juvenile facility in a week or so here, maybe next Monday. And maybe somebody could kind of share details on that in the chat to make sure I didn't get that wrong. I'm wondering, maybe it's a question for you, Ken, or for someone. Could you speak to sort of the process and the timeline of this jail design and what public input looks like, and then also sort of maybe what that relationship is with the city and the county? I know there's a lot of questions around sort of who's involved in what as that process moves forward.
Yeah, well, the board just a couple weeks ago authorized moving to basically construction drawings for the facility itself. So the replacement jail portion, that includes basically a small portion of the existing jail is the dispatch center, and then the rest of it is on an all new facility next to the existing jail. It's design, or I'm sorry, the next step is really to get the construction drawings, and then our Market and Johnson, who's our construction manager, will take those, go out and get prices, and then provide the board with a kind of a more firm a cost, and then they would move forward to the actual bidding of the project and construction. We anticipate that groundbreaking would occur probably in late August, and that's basically where we're at right now. The committee is going through civil drawings, mechanical drawings, working with utilities to relocate utilities, that kind of thing. As far as the city goes, it was in the paper not too long ago that they're still considering options for their police department, and so really we haven't moved forward at all on that. We're waiting for the city to decide if they want to continue to be a tenant or if they want to move their location somewhere else. We have a contract with the city that goes through 2024, so they have some time to work on that. That's basically it.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. I appreciate that input. And I maybe just briefly is there anyone, other county board, county commissioners, anyone else to speak to the timeline of the process or anything else? I just wanted to make sure I held space for that if there's other pieces to fill in. So maybe one more. So I know we're coming up on 7:30, and as we're sort of revising as we go and looking at what some next steps will look like, which I'll talk about in a little bit, I'm wondering what I would like to ask, and this is kind of a broad question for a lot of the panelist folks here involved tonight, and maybe just a signpost to the folks with us tonight. So as I ask this question, there's responses I'd really like to hear in the chat. I mean, are there any kind of these big primary questions you were hoping to have answered on these topics tonight that you didn't get answered? And maybe we can speak to some of those too. But the one I want to ask is this came up, it was expressed in a lot of different ways, but it was sort of the same intention and the same question, the listening session, the survey. And it was really sort of the way we framed it was, how can community members, nonprofits, community groups, how can others help for kind of finding support, starting, being a part of, growing programs outside of the system, and where do we start? And I think maybe this process hopefully can start to speak to some answers to that, because that's some of the work we want to do in May. But I'm curious, just imagining that there's a face on that question and somebody's just sort of coming to you and saying, I want to do this work, I want to see some community-based programs. I don't even know where to start. It feels overwhelming. It feels hard. I'm not sure who to talk to or how this works. Like, I mean, what would be some kind of advice and next steps and pathways for folks?
Brian, this is Chris Meyer, and I don't know that I have an exact answer for your question as it relates to community-based programs, but as a commissioner that was, I'm still in my first term, I will tell you that I worked at a Fortune 500 company, and I thought I was used to bureaucracy, right? But the bureaucracy involved in the levels of government and the regulation from the state is astonishing to me. And so these questions are not simple. And what I am finding is that they don't have black and white answers. So knowing that there's a need for more crisis mental health services, I've started having conversations. And what I realize is that there are federal regulations that keep the county from subsidizing that which medical assistance doesn't fully reimburse. That makes it hard for a healthcare provider to actually provide those services. And so we don't have those services now in the city of Winona. So what will it take to get that back? It's going to take involving our state legislators, our federal delegation, and folks who are really knowledgeable about all the ins and outs of this industry and how it works. And that doesn't mean that we can't put together folks to do that, but it does take support. And I hope to sort of gather together and channel some of the energy of the folks that are concerned about this issue to actually partner with me to help lobby our legislators and to try and figure out a way. Let's say we have a lot of American Recovery Plan money at the state level right now. Is there a way that we can use some of that here in Winona County to provide some of the things that we need? So they're difficult questions, but I think the first step for me has always been trying to understand what, if it was easy, it would be done. So what are the complexities, and then who do we need to involve? Because it truly does have to be collaborative. A single individual or a single entity or the county alone can't figure out what all the issues are that need to be figured out. But I think if we can come together, that then we have the possibility of moving forward on some of these issues.
Thanks, Chris. And then I'll go to Justin and Karen. And Ken, I wasn't sure if that was you kind of speaking to, but maybe.
Yeah, I'll wait my turn.
Sounds good. So we'll do Justin, Karen, and Ken. And I do want to mention too that, Chris, I heard that kind of call for some collective action around policy advocacy too, and I flagged that as something we could continue the conversation on too. So how about Justin, Karen, and then Ken responding to that question?
Okay, thank you, Brian. If you want to get involved in all of this, the Jail and Jail Alternatives Committee of the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council meets on the fourth Wednesday of every month at noon. We're on Zoom for the moment, so whatever the fourth Wednesday of May is, I think it's 26, but I'm not sure. We are responding to the SIM chart that we're waiting for the final draft of. We're responding to what we're hearing tonight in this session, and we're going to begin to plan programs to meet the needs, meet the gaps that the SIM workshop identified for us. So if you'd like to be a part of all this, you'd like to help design it, and then find a place for you to do some work on it, some volunteer work on it, come to the Jail and Jail Alternatives Committee meeting. Go to the county website, to the CJCC website, and let Colleen Engel know that you want to know how to get into the Jail and Jail Alternatives Committee meeting. That can happen.
Great, thanks, Justin. And Karen.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I was going to speak to what Justin talked about. I think we're at a point. In some ways, it's amazing that we've got this Engage Winona work going on at the same time that we also were doing the sequential intercept model mapping, which was part of our Winona Reentry Assistance Program plus grant through the Justice Mental Health Collaborative Program from the Department of Justice. And those things came together independently, but I think the information and the energy, the community, interest can really morph together. So in some ways, I'll echo what Justin said. I know there's people who don't want this to be part of a criminal justice label, but I like to think of the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council not as just focused solely on criminal, but focused on the community, because public health is involved in, in fact, I've seen studies about juvenile delinquency is really a public health problem. Frankly, criminal behavior and everything else is a public health problem, but it's also a problem of poverty. It's a problem of housing insecurity and food insecurity. And so at least the way we run the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, and I'm very proud to say that I'm the chair and that Justin runs the Jail and Jail Alternatives Committee, and Colleen Engel is an extraordinary executive director, and we've got great chairs as well on other committees. Rebecca Church is the Juvenile Justice, and looking into that SIM mapping for juvenile, when we start identifying the gaps, I think what the great work that we're doing here tonight with everybody is going to be very, again, I just see this synergy. I'd also like to note, and I'll call him out, sorry, Eldridge, but I'm going to call you out. Eldridge McClatchy is also joined us, and I'm part of what he started, which is the Front Porch Unity, right, Eldridge? I think, which is a program that is a community-based, and I'm part of his advisory board to look at how can we help youth in the Winona community. So I would also just say, one of the things we can do as individuals is to join together from our various different disciplines and areas of where we work and are part of this community, is to support community efforts like Eldridge's that are really outside of what we do as I do as county attorney. But I feel that as county attorney, it's important for me to bring my support to those kind of groups. And so that's why I joined that. And it's one way of helping the youth. But it's really supporting and trying to keep energized those kind of efforts and working together. So, but I think, we're at a really great point with what we're doing here with Engage Winona, as well as the sequential intercept mapping for adults, and hopefully then down the road for juveniles or for youth. And so I'll just end there. I see the yellow.
Yeah, thanks, Karen, and to Ken.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that sometimes we lose perspective on the size of the kind of the issue. And when you look at Health and Human Services, and I know Karen Sanis, who's the director, would mention this, is that we have 98 different social programs and 30 different income maintenance programs that we're mandated by the state to provide. So that's the framework that we work under. Anything extra comes out at the direct expense of the county. And so I think what we've tried to do is I think what our all these people that are involved over the years, like Karen and so forth, have tried to find ways to supplement that with the treatment court and RAP and different things like that. But one of the things that we have in this community are just tons of resources that I think from in the past, the county's focused on that package of mandated services. And Karen and I have talked about, how to kind of have HHS reach out a little bit more into the community, work with our partners, work with the not-for-profits to create more of a web for the, for the entire community. And that includes integrating with the CJCC and operations, for instance, being on to committees and doing different things. So there's a lot of services out there right now. There are gaps, no doubt. And I think the SIM mapping is a good way to point those out. I think that Commissioner Myers' comment that a lot of this has to be reworked at the state level, that's certainly true for programs that we already administer and that could be maybe done better or differently. And then, of course, there's working with our local partners. So I just want to throw that out there. It's a very complex issue. It's not simple at all.
Yeah,
Can I comment on that too, Ken? Thank you for bringing that up too. I also wanted to kind of point out too that the partnerships that we are establishing, one of the great things that we have going on right now that I got involved in with on the ground floor of is our community hub, which is through Live Well Winona, and they are truly prevention, early intervention, addressing social determinants of health within our communities. And we are really, really pushing this program forward and trying to grow it throughout Winona. We continue to talk about additional funding. How can we have community connectors at Hiawatha Valley, one at FCC, some at the school. We've got 2 at Winona Health right now. And it's really been a very beneficial program and is working well. And it has truly been a collaborative effort of community agencies coming together. And I would love to be part of more of that within the communities and addressing the social determinants of health that if we can divert people from coming into our mandated services. So I just wanted to put that plug in.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. And
Brian?
Yes, yeah, the last comment to you, Marie. That sounds great. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to say that in a big sense, we already are involved in working to resolve some of these issues. We are identifying the needs through the SIMS discussions and these community discussions. We're identifying the resources. And the other day, the State Public Health Committee put it in the context of what Ken and Karen just talked about, and Karen Sonneman also, is that what we've done through the pandemic was we've managed the treatment and the tracing and the tracking and all of that. But in terms of services for families and for schools and for businesses, we've exposed a whole lot of weaknesses in our communities due to mental health, food insecurity, rental, you name it. And so we are hoping to address some of those new American Rescue Plan funds in some of the what used to be considered, or sometimes it's considered, public health issues, but they're really prevention issues in the community. So I feel like we already have started in this discussion. What I would really like to see us come out of this out of all these discussions is some direction and some mechanism for us to continue and to work together. You know, we really, if we're going to advocate for things, we really have to be working together on the issues, and we have to be knowledgeable. So I think we've started to do some of that, and I would really like to see us come together with some mechanism to continue in a productive way. So that's our third community session, right, Brian?
Great, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Marie. And I think that teased that up really well. I mean, I'll note that it's 20 to 8, that we talked about closing shortly after 7:30, and noting there's some links in the chat. I don't want to attempt to condense these to the point where I lose the message, but I'll encourage folks to see some of the messaging in the chat. I think there's a continued call for community-based care and support and systems. I think seeing the question around health and human services community-based programming, I think it's a great question to flag, Tyler, for that future conversation in May, and some other pieces talking about sort of the lens of the work. So I'll direct folks to that, and also note that we're going to be collecting and condensing this conversation. This is being recorded, and we'll be sharing that video for folks to watch, and then also collecting the information and condensing that and sharing that out, including what's in the chat. The next steps for us, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a link in the chat that is really important for participants here tonight, just to take 30 seconds for as you leave. I've sort of, as we've sort of transitioned our content today, I've added some questions to that, and there's a couple of really critical ones. One is a prompt to invite folks, if there's questions you didn't have answered here tonight, please take a minute to share that in there, and we will do what we can to get those answered, and we will be sharing those on our website, social media, through the county, and then also through the project email list, which I know a lot of folks have signed up for. So we know that we could only get to so many here tonight. We couldn't answer them all, but the intention is to really try and get those answers for folks. So please complete it that way. And then there's also a preference poll in that form for folks to weigh in on some of the, if we're imagining that in May there's this continued transition to collaborative action, we're working on things that feel meaningful and achievable, there's a preference poll for some areas to get a sense of where folks might want to engage, whether it's around youth issues or the restorative justice issue that we heard, some policy advocacy. So please complete that. So tentatively we've been sort of scheduling these in the last week of May. I think that's sort of our tentative plan for the last week of the month. Our tentative plan is for the last week of May. But again, the project email list, the social media, Facebook pages, Instagram for Engage Winona, the county website and Engage Winona's website are really good places to stay in touch with this. So really just to close, to be an appreciation for everybody's time and energy and presence here tonight, for the continued engagement and energy to want to be committed to this and do this work, to find ways of kind of building community-based support and wraparound support and using all the resources in our community. And that's really what Engage Winona is here for. And I'm just so appreciative to hear a lot of that reflected. So thank you to all the panelists here tonight. Thank you to all the participants here tonight. And I think with that, I'll wish everybody a good evening, and keep an eye out for the recording and the next steps, and we'll be in touch. And I think there's still a little bit of time to enjoy the beautiful end of the evening here tonight. So thanks everybody, and enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thank you.